Hey, well, Ratana, before you tell us more about what you're up to now, please share your educational journey. So you can go back as far as you want to, or highlight the pieces of your educational journey that you feel really kind of puts you at the place where you're at now or informs your point of view. Just tell us a little bit more.
Sure. Uh, wow. There's a lot of different sources of inspiration, I feel like, that brought me to Oakland Unified School District. It's kind of hard to pinpoint a specific thing, but I would say at the heart of a lot of my motivation to work in education really just centers around my parents' experience as refugees. Not just my parents' experience, actually, my experience too. Our family experiences like refugees to this country. My parents, well, my mother especially, was an educator in Cambodia, and she, along with my father, had fled the country around 1982, and they, like many Cambodian American families that are here in the U.S. now, they had escaped some pretty horrific things that happened in Cambodia around the 70s and 80s. And it was a period of time where, if in some way you were associated with the West, or you were associated with this sort of, I don't know, more modern educated class of folks in the country, you were essentially targeted for um, extermination. And I often think about my family's experience. And to them, for them, they were both educated. My father was on track to work in medicine. My mother was a teacher who eventually became a nurse, post Khmer Rouge. And it just astounded me to think that uh, just for them being simply educated and believing in the things that they did kind of put a target on their back, and they had to flee
Mhm,
the country,
mhm,
to come to the US and hopefully carve out a better life for us. And so our origin story is a bit complicated. It's a bit tragic, and I I think growing up, I've spent so much of my young adult life and leading into now just trying to figure out just what our family history is, and what was lost, and things that we've overcome. And I guess, long story short, it's just always reminded me of the power of, like, education,
mhm.
the power of knowledge. I feel like I grew up, well, actually, I should say, when we moved to the United States, we first arrived in the Tenderloin of San Francisco. I think 2 or 3 days right before Halloween, which was a very
Oh,
unusual experience.
yeah.
And we moved around quite a bit until we settled in the suburbs of Southern California, until we found like a safer place to be. And those suburbs happened to be the wonderful city of Rancho Cucamonga. I
Mhm.
don't know if you guys have heard of it. People
Yeah,
often mention Next Friday as
exactly.
a
Yes.
reference. And I would say, for the most part, my education there was pretty decent. I didn't have to deal with a lot of the issues that I feel like a lot of the youth, and, like, especially like Oakland Unified, have to deal with. Is a relatively safe place.
Mhm,
And I just spent a lot of time there, sort of being, one, the only Cambodian American within like miles and miles of like the city.
right.
um and I feel like that kind of instilled in me just sort of this sharp contrast in terms of, like, well, here's everybody else, here's your family. And I would say it wasn't until I got to college I started to learn more, I guess, in more detailed clarity, just the context behind our arrival to the United States, what it means to be a newcomer, what it means to
Mhm,
be a refugee, what it means to hold a lot of this
mhm,
difficult and traumatic history. And it gave me such a strong sense of identity.
mhm,
And I just knew growing up that, in terms of a career path, I wanted to, in some capacity, support people on their educational journey, people on their, I don't know, just yeah, education just seemed to make a lot of sense. And what's interesting for me is I'm in a department where I work with data, and data is just sort of like one small like facet that helps people kind of figure out
Mm-hmm.
stuff about what's going on at school sites.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean, it's very broad. So
Mm-hmm.
anyways, I feel like I've sort of meandered around there, but there was this sort of an immigration story that really inspired my commitment to education, and helping people support uh, students, teachers, families with data that hopefully can illuminate and enlighten, um, I don't know, darker corners of the educational world that sort of
Yeah.
need a bit of a transparency in it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. I could probably specify or clarify things if you need.
No, I just like what you said just now, just about, the darker corners of education and how the data, or just understanding how to use the data, can really shine a light on those corners
Mhm.
that we need to look into or bring closer to the center so that it doesn't end up being left in the shadows. And I don't know, like for me, I think Christina and I have talked about this in a few different ways, just how data tells a story. And now for you, like it really came from this desire to be able to kind of go off of this one individual story, like your own story of like going through the educational system and having been living in different places and kind of seeing what it was like for your parents, or understanding what it was like for your parents to not have the, be persecuted for their educational level, right? And now being in a country where education is seen as this way, like what everyone needs to do is to continue to rise in the levels of education, and you wanting to use this data set to tell more of a story. So starting from this one individual story to now saying like, how do we compile all this information to try to figure out what the stories are? Start off with this larger story and then try to kind of funnel it in. So I just find it fascinating because I think oftentimes when we hear data, some people just shrug their shoulders or get really, I don't know,
Defensive.
exactly, defensive, or just not want to really look at it as a tool and more as a additional burden, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
and getting their work done. So I don't know. I find it fascinating. So kind of, I guess, give us a little bit more like what got you specifically into this department? Because not a lot of people think of like, I want to work in education specifically on helping people understand data or make it easier for them. Like, what got you there?
Sure. I've been working at Oakland Unified School District since 2007 or 8, I think. It's been quite some time. Before that, well, it's my first, I guess you could say, real job right after college. And like I mentioned earlier, I knew I wanted to sort of be in some type of service related to education or nonprofit or community organizing. And I
Mm,
pretty much knew somebody that said, hey, there's a research position open at Oakland Unified. Maybe you should apply. And I started off as a research assistant.
oh,
That didn't really go anywhere. It was a very unusual time at the district. I think we're coming fresh off of like a state takeover. I eventually ended up working on the assessments team.
mm,
Most of that just involves logistics around assessments, making sure people have what they need to administer tests and meet deadlines, things like that. That work was interesting for a while until it just wasn't. And then I started having that inner calling of just like I feel like I could be doing something more meaningful. And fortunately for me, there was a position that opened up on the data team, which
mm,
was all about taking data from these very different messy places, like spreadsheets and different platforms and different all sorts of different formats, and piecing that together in a way that hopefully all of our stakeholders at OUSD can use to make some sort of, or first gather some sort of insight about what's really happening at school sites when it comes
yeah.
to demographics or testing, and then just plan accordingly, like
Hmm.
so that was huge for me, and it's just it coincided around a time where Oakland Unified did this very wonderful thing. I felt like Oakland Unified has done a great job of like really investing in their own like research,
Mm.
assessment and data team. And what happened was we started to, I feel like, what's the word, not modernize, but we started using systems and tools that were pretty much on par with what other like tech leaders were using. So
Mm.
one, we started using a lot of like SQL database querying, to pretty much pull and manage and blend our data.
Mhm.
And we also started using this wonderful tool called Tableau. I could see Christina nodding her head. I think that was one of our first interactions. Oakland Unified at some point was very early in terms of adopting
Mm.
this very cool data tool.
You know, they were real talk.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're essentially dashboards. We make dashboards that allow people to look at data, filter data, create
Mm.
visuals that are very aesthetic, and hopefully help aggregate and simplify, all this data that people get intimidated by, in a way that's just interactive and fun. And
Yeah.
we were sort of like working in our own little bubble. And I think eventually, over time, a lot more of our dashboards became more widely available, not just to just central office like leadership, but to teachers and like the community, like the public at large. And before we knew it, a lot of school districts from all over the United States were asking us, like, "Hey, what are you guys doing over there? Like, this is really interesting. This is really fascinating." And the data that we've been able to put out there has been able to just, I think, it's just kind of expedite some of the thinking or understanding, about what's happening at like
Yeah.
schools, and what's happening at like the student level, the school level, the network level, district
Mhm.
level. There was just so much, I guess, flexibility in terms of how folks could analyze data.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's just really benefited like our work. And for me personally, so this is where it gets more personal. So
Yeah.
growing up in a refugee immigrant household, my parents would often ask, what are you going to do with your life, when you're an adult?
Yeah.
Like, what, like, because every day always felt like survival mode, right?
Mm.
So
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
always instilled in me this sort of forward thinking sort of mentality of just like, where are you going to be, what are you going to do, because if you can't make it here, we're totally screwed.
Yeah.
So it was inspiring but also kind of stressful. But I remember one of the first things I would always tell them was, I kind of want to be an artist when I grow up. And for your refugee immigrant parents to hear that, they're just kind of like, oh
they're
no,
like, oh
that,
dang.
yeah, that is not, what are you talking about? Like, you're not going to be able to take care of yourself with that. So it those are skill sets I never really developed, at in my K through 12 education and my college education. And I've kind of just had them on my belt, very rusty, not really using them. And it wasn't until I got on the data team where, okay, you have all this quantitative data, all these, numbers and stats about what's going on with their kids and school sites. And one of my managers asked me, like, hey, can you work on a report, try to make it look nice? And I thought, oh, that's the first time I've ever been
Yeah.
asked to like, use that part of my brain for something work related. And then before I knew it, it's just a lot of I realized the dashboards that I was making, there's this field called like, user experience and like graphic design. I had tapped into these sort of like skills I had left untouched for
Yeah.
quite a long time. And it ended up turning into this sort of like skill set, that was integral to, I feel like, the success of a lot of our, reporting. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
it's just kind of a weird, like, how that came full circle for me. But um
That's awesome.
so yeah, long story short, again, that's is just sort of this trajectory of like Oakland Unified actually, I feel
Mhm.
like, doing something really right with like maintaining the integrity of our data team and investing in tools that put us on the cutting edge and giving us the ability to just kind of grow, figure things out, and expand to the point where I think when we first started, we had about 5 dashboards that were available to, Oakland Unified for folks to use. Now we've got, I don't know, probably like, at least 100, I think. So
Wow.
um, some folks like to say that we're very, data rich but analysis poor, which I certainly feel like that way sometimes. My official title at the school district is data analyst, but it's you might be surprised to find that I've get very little time actually to analyze data. I spend so much time just pulling data, cleaning the data, and then visualizing it in some sort of way for other folks like probably yourself or, you know, folks on the academic team to put that analysis cap on and do more with it. So yeah, so that's sort of just how things have unfolded here at Oakland Unified when it comes to data.
That
Yeah,
is.
you know, oh,
No, go
go.
ahead, Christina.
You know, Rattana, like I think during the time you started your beginning years in OUSD, that was Elin and I's start as administrators.
Mm-hmm.
And we use your data sets that you would give us. Like it helped us specifically with master scheduling. It helped us decide how many support classes we need or if we needed any. It helped us decide upon like section allocation and how many teachers we need the following
Yeah.
year. It helped us decide, like, we used it to just plan, like, basically everything.
Yeah.
And it's,
Mm.
it's a lot of data. Like, I mean, it was a whole lot.
Yeah.
And it was really, really helpful. And, like, I like how you put a whole bunch of, I don't even know the terminology. It's like we have very specific things we want, like
Like a
broken down by
query.
the query sets,
Oh,
um,
yeah, continue.
ethnicity, the A
Mhm.
through G, all that. I mean, it's a whole lot, and we were able to. You sent that to us through Excel, so like you helped us dwindle stuff down because it's
Yeah.
overwhelming, especially for someone like me that's not tech
Yeah.
savvy. So when I did go onto the website and did it on my own, it was definitely overwhelming. But then like we appreciate how you like simplified things for us.
Yeah.
And then like even more than that, you we were working together. And I'm actually going to say I said this in our intro too. Like, I didn't realize that it was you this entire time. Like, I would just talk to like our admin support provider, and I'm like, look, the data sets that are given to the admin team, that's totally fine. I was like, but now I need data sets for the ninth grade teachers, but I need to make it so simplified because I don't want them to be distracted by everything else. So I was like, I need their like no Excel sheets. I was like, I need it to be pretty in different colors. I need it broken down by house. I
Mhm.
just want it I want it narrowed down to A through G, high school requirements, break it down by ethnicity, please. Um, Not only did you break it down by ethnicity, like I don't know if I asked you to do this or if you decided to do it on your own, but I like how you differentiated Asian and Southeast Asian.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because a lot of
I'm glad you
states
bring
No,
that
still
up.
don't do that.
no,
Yeah.
I was like, and that was super freaking helpful,
Yeah.
right? Because
Mhm.
Southeast Asians are struggling in in the public school system, and
Yeah.
I feel like they just get lodged in like with the stereotypical model minority piece.
Yeah.
And so seeing that in our data set within our ninth grade houses,
Hmm.
that was that going back to what you said, like you were shining a light on something
Mhm.
that I don't think
Yeah.
we would have touched on
Yeah.
Mhm.
or addressed
Mhm.
unless we saw that like
Mhm.
tangibly in our face.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that, there's that piece that, I really want to like thank you for. And then I left OUSD. And then when I came back, I no longer had to ask to like for you to make these reader friendly color coordinated charts anymore, because all of a sudden the dashboard, I shouldn't say all of a sudden, I'm not it, like it progressed there. The online dashboard for OUSD, oh my gosh, it's like super friendly. I mean, it's like anything that you could want. You don't have to do the Aline, there's no more keep stew, blah blah. You
You guys
know
were
what I'm saying?
querying yourselves.
Yeah, we were.
Yeah, I was like, oh God, like there's no more of those code talk. Like you just like there's like
Yeah.
drop down menus that do the query right there for you. It's
Well,
insane. And like, and that's you too.
well,
Yeah.
today, Rattana, can you tell us more about that? And I know you like also
Sure.
touch a little bit more about like the idea behind breaking down certain demographics,
Yeah.
because I think, and that goes into our next question, because we think about like equity and educational justice and just
Yeah.
really, wanting to make these types of informed but difficult decisions when it
Mhm.
comes to really honoring our students and uplifting those that need uplifting
Yeah.
in our decision. So tell us more about that, because you kind of like perked up when Christina mentioned how you broke down even the Asian category that we often don't see
Yeah.
broken down in districts, which by the way, I haven't worked in a district that has a data, the way OUSD
Nah,
does. So,
yeah, for real. To
I
this
mean,
very day.
more districts need to be reaching out to
Yeah.
OUSD and see that. But tell
Yeah,
us,
that's
like,
great to hear.
talk to us about just your, like, how that came to be and how you feel
Sure.
like your position, feeds into equity and educational justice for our school leaders.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you guys said a lot of like really interesting, great
Mhm.
stuff there that reminds me to Oh, it just reminds me of like a lot of the work that we've done here. I mean, at Oakland Unified School District and a lot of other school districts still, maybe. I remember a time when I was on the data team and we didn't have dashboards. We didn't have, our what we like to call our DIY like data warehouse, which is essentially one data architect building all this stuff that all the reports sit on. I remember a time where we would line up in a train and have these physical binders that would have like a table of contents, and like someone would be directing somebody to say, all right, the attendance PDF, which was essentially a colorful spreadsheet, which isn't that fun to look at, and is probably a huge reason why people are intimidated by data, because that's just not very
Yeah.
accessible for most folks, I would say.
Mhm.
We would line up in this train and just put in these like PDF files or these printed out PDF files into a binder, and then that would take like a couple days after all the reports were like finally reproduced, and then we would go to like a retreat where we would hand each school like a physical binder of like all their data, and then they would spend like weeks in the fall analyzing that and kind of like making decisions off of that. Times have like really changed. So our team, it's not just me. We have a number of other data analysts that all focus on different sections of like educational work. I have a colleague who focuses mostly on high school data. I have a colleague who's actually like an analytics, or not analytics, oh my gosh, a geospatial analytics like
Oh, wow.
specialist. Others focus on attendance data, suspension data. And so we're all sort of like broken off into like different, I guess, like work areas that allow us to, I don't know, I guess divide and conquer, I guess you can say. So for me, the work, it came a time in my data analyst career where my manager had said, we need you to pick sort of a focus area. Can you come up with something? And I was just at a loss for like what to do. And my manager actually made the decision for me. She said, given your educational background, your family history, it seems like you'd be a good match for the English language learner and multilingual achievement office. And for folks that don't know, this department focuses mostly on the work of English learners, students who speak a home language other than English at home, and our newcomer immigrant asylee refugee population. And I realized, oh my God, I don't know why I didn't think of that. Like, yeah, that's obviously like a great match for me. And so a lot of the data work that I've given in support of them has done what like you have like specified, Christina. There was a time when we had these huge influxes of newcomers coming from like Central South America. And to me, it made sense because this was sort of a demographic and part of the news world that I had followed closely. I'm a bit sensitive to people that are displaced from their country and kind of have to find a new place to start fresh. And it was pretty obvious to a lot of people in the Bay Area that a lot of these folks are ending up here in East Oakland, especially. Surprisingly, there were people that were like, I don't believe this. Like, this just isn't true. Like, I've got other priorities at my school site. I don't understand why this is important for me to focus on. And, folks at Elmo were just like, hey, can you help us put together something, some sort of data that helps people kind of see, like, look at these spikes. And, we're moving away from these PDFs and folders and, data reports and, flash drives to using technology that allows us to like pretty much pull data every day and updates like pretty much every day quite easily. And it's automated, and I just remember it's really strange because I don't, I guess because I do this so much, I don't always think about how powerful these tools are for us. But to have folks that are working on the ground supporting these refugee, asylee, newcomer populations finally have quantitative evidence to say, like, look, we've got like hundreds more students at our school sites now. You can't deny this. Like what do we do now? And so it's nice. I mean, there's so many people working on the ground with that sort of like qualitative on the ground experience, but now they have quantitative numbers to back that up. And that makes like such a huge difference when you need resources, when you need funding. And that was one bit of the work that I've always felt very proud of, to just kind of say like, well, we know this is obviously happening, but like what evidence or proof do we need? And I think that's where the power of data can sometimes come in to fill these gaps. Christina, you had mentioned something that like I felt very, very passionate about, which is like the disaggregation of data. These tools allow us to do that much more simply and efficiently. And as an Asian American, you might be able to relate to this. There's this sort of perception that many of us are this sort of like model minority, that we're hardworking, that we sort of like embody this like work ethic because of our cultural background that allows us to sort of, I guess, it tends to, I guess, portray us as being like much more successful academically, professionally. And there's so many problems with that. One, that whole model minority, the idea of being a model minority, that's like really essentially a conservative backlash against like Black communities. And it's just kind of used as like, well, hey, Black folks, like Asians are doing just fine and they're doing that on their own. Why can't you do that? And it's just like, okay, that's very problematic because at one level, it's just now all of the responsibility is on the individual. And we tend to, with that sort of logic, overlook institutional and system-wide, examples of just racism and inequality. The other thing I want to say about that too, because I come from a population of Asian Americans that really don't fit that mold at all. Like Southeast Asian Americans, I believe was one of the largest, if not still the largest group of immigrants and refugees to have come to the United States since like the 60s or 70s. And, these are folks that didn't, unlike previous waves of immigration from Asian countries, folks like us, we were forced to leave our country. And when we left, we brought with us like, memories of like war and famine and genocide and just total, I don't know, just unspeakable and just sort of unimaginable experience that folks still have trouble talking about. And so we're bringing that with us to the US. And like I had mentioned earlier, our family settled in the Tenderloins. Like that experience wasn't very different for a lot of other Southeast Asian Americans who ended up settling in rougher urban communities where jobs weren't available, educational opportunities weren't available. There was definitely a lot of crime, and then not to mention just all of the trauma that these folks were still processing. And so is it any wonder that academically, when you look at data for Southeast Asian Americans, when that data is available,
Exactly. Yeah.
everything's red, right? So
Hmm.
uh, a huge problem with this sort of, and a lot of these struggles are just made invisible because
Hmm.
uh, when you look at data on Asian Americans, there's just this very, very broad category of Asian. And unless you're disaggregating that bucket of like Asian American into Hmong or Lao and Vietnamese and Cambodian, a lot of these struggles are going to be masked. So I guess I'll wrap that up by saying I knew somebody who was applying for a scholarship for some college program that she was shooting for, and she was talking to her diversity counselor, uh, and she presented her sort of personal statement to our diversity counselor, and her diversity counselor said, it's not enough that you're an Asian American woman. You have to bring up something related to the struggles in your life. And I guess the message she was conveying to her was like, you're Asian, you haven't been through enough
Mm.
to warrant this, like, special scholarship that you're applying for. This was coming from her
Yeah,
diversity, like,
I believe
and
it.
she was like Southeast Asian American. She had been
Hmm.
through war and trauma and all, like,
Hmm.
all these horrible things. And she's still having to prove to a certified diversity counselor, like, I've been through, I've
Yeah.
endured, I've been through things. So it's, yeah, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in
Hmm.
terms of uh I guess illuminating or highlighting just the struggles of like Southeast Asian Americans. And I don't want to make it stop there too, because
Hmm.
I look at all these other newcomers coming from like Central and South America, and they're from a totally different region of the world, but I just feel like a lot of their struggles are essentially no different from my own.
Yeah.
And something that I probably talk at length about too, but I'll stop before I start going on for too long, is that in my experience, and I feel like in a lot of these other countries where we're not accepting, where so many of these uh, folks are coming here. I will say that the United States has played such a tremendous role in U.S. foreign policy to destabilize regions of the world that produce refugees
Hmm.
and asylees in the first place. Like,
Right.
in Cambodia, uh, the country was bombed so heavily by the United States government that it created the conditions that eventually
Hmm.
forced us to leave. And so when you
Hmm.
take that as sort of like the historical foundation of like our immigration, the major impetus for us to move, it just feels like, the US holds some responsibility for
Yeah.
taking care of these folks. And last I checked, like, if you're not indigenous to the United States, you're probably from somewhere else.
Hmm.
And I just wish there was more of a celebration of that
Hmm.
diversity. Whereas right now, I just feel like the language and politics around immigration is just so toxic and hateful. I
Hmm.
just, to me, there's nothing more American than sort of being from somewhere else and trying to make
Yeah.
it out here. So,
Yeah.
anyways, that was a lot there.
No, but you said, I mean, you said a lot of important things. And I think that's part of the reason why, understanding how to use data. And, I don't know, my hope is that districts do invest more in producing a lot of school districts don't have a data team.
Mhm.
And at least thinking about how can they advocate for it, because like what you said, the data does help us advocate for resources and for students, because it's not just the stories that we have or the anecdotes, but we have the numbers to say, like, this is what we're talking about. How can we get more support in
Yeah.
this area? And in the counseling world, because that's my background, is that often what the National Association says is like the data helps you advocate for your students. But then again, like, how do these departments advocate if they don't have a data team or data sets or understand how to use the data and aren't maybe disaggregating the data? Because I agree with you. We need to disaggregate it even more to be able to fully understand the big picture versus just, those generalized stereotypes that we often hear. So I don't know. I mean, just a lot that you said, and I just wish that a lot more districts would do that. And I want our school leaders to take this away and say, like, we can use data in a way that's going to help our job, but also how to ask districts to, you know, put a little bit more money behind or resources behind getting this data into the hands that it needs to be in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you mentioned this before, like how OUSD, we're very data heavy, but what was the second
All
part?
right.
I think I'd mentioned something like we are data rich but analysis poor.
Or, yep.
Yes. And
Yeah.
you know, what I noticed about OUSD is that we have so many tools and resources, you know, data being one of them. And and all these like our website is on point. You click onto it, there's just so many resources. It's if you could compare it to like our neighboring school districts, it's like it's not anything in comparison to OUSD.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, it's like,
Mhm.
can we honestly say that the average school, as in administrators and teachers, use all the resources? And if so, how often and to what extent?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you know, not to, you know, put anybody on blast, but you know, I'm back at the schools district again. I mean, I work for OUSD again, and so now that I'm not at one particular school site, and I travel around to different school sites, I see that. I see schools where they use the data
Mm-hmm.
to inform their practice, and then I work with schools where it's not even part of the discussion.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's just not being a teacher coach, that's being an admin coach too outside the
Mhm.
district.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, yes, you could have the tool, but what are you going to use it? So
Yeah.
it's now there's like, well, why are we not using it? So it's like, okay, one, what's the district expectation for administrators? Are administrators trained?
Mm-hmm.
um, because how could we expect the administrators um, to implement data usage at their school if they themselves are not trained? So it's like there's a whole bunch of questions to ask as to why we're not using all these beautiful tools that
Yeah.
OUSD has to offer.
Yeah. Um, in my experience, I've met such a wide range of folks when it comes to their comfort level with
Mm.
data.
Mhm.
I would venture to say that in general, I hope people are making decisions based off of facts, whether that be quantitative or qualitative. And if it's quantitative, there's a rich array of reporting that you can pull from at Oakland Unified School District. So at another level, it's just, to me, it seems like it really boils down to like different schools and
Mm.
the leadership there.
Mhm.
Um, Urban Promise Academy, for example, in the middle school, I've had I feel like a pretty close relationship working with them throughout the years because they seem like they have like a very strong ELD program. They are constantly reaching out to me, asking me like, when is this data report going to get updated? Um, uh, Constantly reaching out saying like, by the way, I think we found a mistake in your report. Can you fix this? And so I've had like a great relationship with them where
Yeah.
like they're not afraid of talking about data. They're not afraid to sort of acknowledge like what they know and what they don't know. They just kind of go at it with like an open mind and say like, well, here's some tools that are available for us, and let's use this and share it with like teachers and students and families. And so that's one population where I feel like, wow, they've done such a tremendous job in sort of
Mm.
destigmatizing like any sort of like blame that's out there in terms of like what the data may or may not say about the quality of education there, and just you looking at the data to say like, well, this is where we're at and this is where we need to be, and then based off the data, here's how we get from here to there.
Mhm.
I've met other schools too, where I've been at other schools too, or talked to other folks where, they'll say things like what's an Excel spreadsheet, or I'll ask them like,
No.
yeah, I'll ask them during a data dive, like, all right, let's get started. Open your internet browser, and they're just like, what is that exactly? And so, as an educator of like educators, like I recognize that people just come in at like
Yeah,
very, very different places,
right.
um, and gosh, I don't know. I spend so much time just working on cleaning data, visualizing reports. I wish I had more time to just kind of get
Mhm.
out there and be what the district used to have, which is like a data coach,
Mm.
somebody that just sort of breaks down
Oh
all the
my
different data
Lord,
opportunities
that
that
would
are.
be
We
Yeah.
Yeah, so we used to have data coaches. We cut them. Very severe budget situation,
Yeah.
and the data coaches have been gone. And I think now that work is just sort of embedded in everybody's own
Mm.
day to day. Like you guys have mentioned too, you guys used to code yourself to pull data. I still find
Mhm.
like a lot of people that are doing that, spending countless hours, days and weeks just pulling their own data. And it's such a relief for me to come in and say, like, oh, I actually did something like that.
Yeah.
Or my team has done something like that for you. So I think part of it is just sort of like an awareness. As much as we've
Mhm.
put out there, there's still some people, their data literacy just isn't there. It needs some work. And there's just some people out there that have no idea that these resources
Mhm.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's just we don't know.
Mhm,
Mhm.
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 You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what's worked for me, I would say maybe this could be a model for like other school districts and leadership. I have a very, very close working relationship with the English Language Learner and Multi Lingual Achievement Office, ELMA. I feels like weekly with the leadership there and their staff, and
Mhm.
those folks don't spend their time doing what I do. They spend their time interacting with school sites. And so they've got
Mm.
staff that sort of, again, divide and conquer, folks that focus on just the newcomer stuff, folks that focus on the elementary ELD stuff and the secondary ELD stuff. And um, they form a bridge between me, because I can't realistically talk to every teacher and principal about what their needs
Right.
are when it comes to like EL data, but they do. And
Mhm.
so it's that relationship that I've
Mhm.
cultivated with the Elma department that allows me to take in feedback
Yeah.
essentially from the source, from folks that are saying, for instance, more recently, like, we're spending all this time trying to figure out where we place our kid in like ELD classes.
Mhm.
And the more I spoke to Nicole Knight, who's the director of that department, the more, it kind of both dawned on us, like, a lot of, if you can just give me the
Mhm.
rules for like what that pathway should be in terms of where a kid should be placed in ELD classes, I can code that in a way that just expedites that work, so that teachers and counselors aren't spending countless hours figuring out like, well, if this is true, then maybe they should be here, but then these other elements are true, so
Yep.
maybe they should be in this other class. So folks at Elma have broken down for me what that flow chart looks like. I've turned that to code, which has been proofed and is now sitting as a dashboard that should be launched at the end of this year. And it should, I think, form the basis of a strategy around
Mhm.
placing the most appropriate place to place like ELs for
Mhm.
the following school year. And at one very, very basic level, I've been told this should help people save so much
Yep.
time, because the rubric around it can, if you're kind
Mhm.
of new or just unsure, it can
Mhm.
get very complicated. And then I don't know, it just brings me joy to know that a
That's
kid
awesome.
obviously will be placed in the right classroom and get the right instruction and curriculum for their hopefully one day language graduation, but also that, teachers and counselors or whoever that's using this dashboard will get, some of their hours back. They,
Yeah.
this is just saving time so that they can focus on other things.
Mhm.
But that's sort of like an investment uh and a relationship that's just been cultivated over the years. But for other school districts wondering, like, I think connecting some stellar data analysts in your district to a
Mhm.
specific area of work or realm of like K through 12 like work,
Mhm.
I think is a worthy investment. And that I've been working with Elma for, I don't know, probably since like 2012, or over 10 years now, I think. And um it's been rewarding, and I think helpful for folks.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of work to do, because
Mhm.
that, even like, I think a couple months ago somebody was saying like, I don't know this or that, and I was just like, oh boy, like, is your okay, how do we, are you on a Mac or a PC? And they're like, what's that? I'm like, oh, okay, let me take another step back.
Oh man, yeah, it's true.
Yeah, and you know what, Ratana, it's like what you just said about like how you narrow the data for student placement.
Mhm.
Um, shout out to Miss Douglas. Do
Hmm.
you know Miss Douglas?
I don't think so.
But that,
Elmo probably does, but not, yeah.
oh my
Tell me
gosh.
about Miss
Well, no,
Douglas.
she was our unofficial data person at
Ah,
Skyline. So it was like man, like she did what you said.
Mhm.
Like we would give her like specific contingencies and we're like, okay, now could you pull that together and give us a list of the students? And
mhm.
I mean, it was like I didn't realize how spoiled we were at that
Oh,
point,
yeah. Mm,
Eileen, when it came to data. Like
yeah.
we had people at the district, like Rattana, and then we had our site level person for something where we just needed something right then and there, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that until I started working at other school districts.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
And
I've heard that. Yeah.
Mhm.
and I've just I like no lie. I reached out to Miss Douglas a couple of times.
Mhm.
And you know Miss Douglas doesn't want to say no.
She doesn't.
I mean, God
Which is
bless.
why she ended up being that data person, because that really wasn't in her job description, but
It was not.
she knew, and she, and it was about building those connections and understanding like how we could use our resources, and saying we don't have time for this, but we know it needs to get done. She figured it out. She knew how to do it. She cared enough. She put in the time to do it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I
It's
mean,
it's just scary. So now you're wondering, I like if the other school districts don't have um a data department district level, or if they don't have a Miss Douglas at their school
Yeah.
site, like how do you place students in your classes?
Yeah.
I
well, and
mean,
that's the biggest issue. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
like what data do you actually use?
If you're an individual working in the school district, and we're talking like ELD placement, you're going to have to find some way to get LPAC data. You're going to have to find some way to get district assessment data. You might want to consider, you might have to go into Aries and say, okay, what is this child a newcomer? Or like, how long have they also been in
mhm.
EL? And then you'll probably have to go into like the course history data and figure out, okay, what ELD classes were they in last year? Okay, was that right? Was that inaccurate? Yeah, it's quite a bit of work.
And
And
sometimes it doesn't happen. Or oftentimes I will say it doesn't happen. And that's the major issue.
yeah, it's Miss, what you said her name was Miss Douglas?
Miss Douglas.
Yes.
She's Miss Douglas should be an inspiration to us all. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, because
Mm-hmm.
this is another thing I'll say about our data team. There's a number of folks, they essentially committed their education and their careers in some capacity to learning how to analyze, manipulate, extract, and visualize data. Folks would be surprised to learn. Oh, I should mention Oakland International, one of my favorite high schools in the school district. We used to, things have sort of changed since the pandemic hit, but before COVID, they would come to, students from that school would come to our department, and we would essentially give them a crash course on like what it took to become a data analyst in the school district, or a data analyst in anything, in case that was sort of like a career path that they were interested in. And I'm thinking of this and Miss Douglas because one of the best parts of like that experience was sharing with those kids just the diversity of backgrounds that we came from. I think we all pulled like a Miss Douglas at some point.
Yeah.
For example, I was a history major and a ethnic studies major in college. I was actually a failed computer science major. And
How ironic is that?
right, exactly. Our director of analytics, or actually our director of rad now, she was a comparative lit major in China. She was actually pursuing her PhD at Cal, hated it there, and decided like I would like to do more real world stuff like in education because the world of academia doesn't really appeal to me. We had a couple folks that were like neuroscientists that were on our team for a while. Somebody else was an economics major. And we
Wow.
and yeah, so there was just a diversity of backgrounds, and I would say we were all essentially nerds to some capacity. I think we all just enjoyed figuring out like how things work, and didn't really shy away from just numbers and data, and a lot of what we did at Oakland Unified, because as you probably already know, there isn't always a lot of money for PD. We
Mhm.
had to teach ourselves how to do a lot of the things that like we're doing now. Essentially, like I said, pulling a Miss Douglas.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so if you have the time and the investment, like maybe that's sort of an area of
Mhm.
inspiration for other school districts and departments wondering like, how can we do this? Sure, it's great to have somebody that already knows SQL or R or Stata or Tableau or all these other like, data capturing tools and visualizations. But yeah, a lot of what we did, we started from scratch. I didn't know SQL until I got to the school district. I didn't know Tableau until my PD is called Google and YouTubing. So that that paid off after many, many hours of endless searches. And honestly, a lot of my colleagues did the same thing until we figured out something that worked. Um,
That's real.
so yeah, that's,
Definitely.
just, for listeners out there that are wondering,
Yeah. Thank
did you
you.
major in like computer engineering? Yes, I failed. And I'm still doing techie data, quantitative related things at work.
Well, Ratana, I mean, I feel like we could go on and on
Mhm.
and on with you because we only touched on like
Yeah.
a small but significant piece. But we want to respect your time. Don't be surprised if we hit you up again for like a part two
Sure.
or something. But we always like to wrap up um our conversations with self-care,
Oh.
right?
Mhm.
Like, because in order for us to do this work, we ourselves need to be in a good place
Yeah.
physically and mentally.
Mhm.
So, what do you do for self-care?
Um, Gosh, I don't know. I don't feel like I'm too different from most people. I do a variety of things. A lot of that has changed though,
Mm.
since the pandemic. I think. Oh, yeah, I used to do a lot of traveling. Haven't been able to do much of that lately. Hopefully that'll change in the coming years. Used to do a lot of running. That has changed also. Running with a mask on was kind of a pain in the butt, and going
Mhm.
to the gym that just didn't seem like a good idea during a pandemic. I so hopefully getting back into that soon.
Mhm.
I gosh, okay. I've been doing just a lot of reading and writing and just research. I I don't know. It's just I've found a lot of solace in books,
Mhm.
books written by folks that have been through
Mhm.
something tremendous, and come out at the end with some sort of like wisdom or insight. Folks have seen my library, and I often get comments, something along the lines of the, dude, your books look really depressing. uh, I don't know. It's just I I don't know. I just enjoy reading
Mhm.
stories about folks that have endured something and come
Mhm.
out at the end still intact in some capacity and changed and transformed. And um I don't know. I'm pulling just a lot of inspiration from literature right now. Beyond that, I've recently engaged to somebody I think you guys are
Yes.
familiar with.
Someone we love so much.
She was our first guest,
Oh
actually.
yeah, that's right. She
Yeah.
mentioned that.
Yeah.
And so it's been she's part of my self-care routine now. Like, you know, whenever things get a little too crazy, we find solace and companionship in one another. And I there was a period of time where I didn't think I'd be here in terms of like a romantic relationship. It's just, yeah,
That's awesome. No, we
being
love it.
single as an Asian American man, it's just there's lots of, it can get very complicated and lonely. And so I'm glad I'm not on dating apps doing the whole screening and trying to, you know, stand out in that capacity. I found somebody that makes me quite happy, and yeah, we she's part of my self-care routine.
Oh,
Yeah, beyond that, I
congrats.
don't know. Just nothing too extraordinarily different from other folks. Just hopefully carving out time to get away and turn work off. To your point, like being able to say, like, I need to stop what I'm doing here and just be
Yeah.
selfish and just focus on myself, because that's important too, and just live your life free from sort of these professional obligations that and it's hard because I, you know, with the work in education, like it's just so,
I know. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know, it's hard for me to say no
Right.
because I
Yep.
know what is dependent on like
Mm-hmm.
what I do, and when
Mm-hmm.
it's not profits, hopefully, I don't think for most folks it's literally just the educational lives of, like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
communities. So it's just kind of hard to stop sometimes.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. We love that one.
You know, Rattana, it's like you are just so like passionate about education. And I just love the fact that it's like you're not a teacher, you're not
Mm-hmm.
an administrator, you're not a counselor, but you are an educator, but in a different
Mm-hmm.
capacity.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if you remember this, but then remember when you came to one of our book club meetings?
Oh yeah, yeah, you guys read Ungrateful Refugee.
Yes, and I at first I wasn't feeling that book. I
Uh-huh.
forgot why, but then when you shared your perspective on it, I actually had an appreciation for that book after that
Mm,
book talk.
mm.
But the reason why I'm bringing that up is because I don't know how we got into it, but we were talking about like I think it was because the Powerball, California Powerball ticket was like
Oh,
almost
something
close to
crazy.
it's something crazy. So we're like, oh, did everyone buy a Powerball? And I think everyone did. And we were just like, okay, so what would you do if you won? And like,
Crazy things that we say.
no, well, I was like, well, the first thing I'm going to do is probably take my entire family to the Mercedes Benz lot, and like everyone could pick their own G-Wagon. And I was like, but of course I'll pay off like bills and then invest and all this stuff. This is what Rattana said.
Oh boy.
The very first thing I want to do is I want to remodel 1000 Broadway, and I want to make one floor just a self-care floor just for like anyone that works in the district. So like there's like a in-house swimming pool, and like a place where like there's like 20 pelotons, and like and then this and that. And we were all like,
That
Wow, did I
is,
say that?
yes, you did. And you're just like,
oh, that's so awesome.
and then but it wasn't pandemic time yet, and you're just like, yeah, and I would make sure that everyone has a one-on-one computer, because everyone still shares Chromebook carts. And we were
Wow.
like, wow. Yeah, eventually.
Christina's buying Mercedes, and
I'm,
Rattana's like thinking about the district.
I'm vaguely remembering like that period of time. So just so folks know, the data team, Brad, Research Assessment and Data, sits on the bottom floor of 1,000 Broadway. And when people walk in, I hear it all the time. People are just like, what are all these umbrellas doing here? In the middle of all these cubes, you have like 20 umbrellas that are like hovering above each and every person's cube. And nobody thought that putting the data team there underneath this huge glass ceiling, like we got so much sunlight, it was blinding. And I'm
Oh, and you
vaguely
guys are looking
remembering
at
now.
screens all day.
Yeah, and we're looking at screens and just sun is shining off every reflective thing and imaginable. And somebody thought, let's put our data team there. And so there's umbrellas there. And I just remember thinking, like, yeah, that wasn't the most comfortable place to work. So I was probably thinking of the self-care for folks at this crazy,
Want to
weird,
replace that first floor.
weird building.
Oh,
Yeah.
I remember what you're talking about now. That's you guys shared the same area with
Payroll and HR.
no, the umbrella
Yeah, all those umbrellas are ours. Yeah.
yes, and to the left was like where Lauren Cherry was, the discipline hearings.
Oh. That's such a wild place. It's just
Yeah.
Yeah.
also when you're located next to payroll and HR, there's always at least like once every like week or two somebody that comes in and they're not happy about like not getting paid or something going
Mhm.
on. And we would hear that all the time, and just they would come after us sometimes, and I'd just be like, okay, so I'm a data analyst.
I
I'm
can help
sorry.
you.
I'm sorry you didn't get your paycheck, but how can I help? Like, let's figure this out. Who can you talk to?
Okay.
Yeah,
All right, like for real, we'll wrap it up with this one last question.
Oh, sure.
So we ask all of our guests, like, what is that one song? Like when it's like you're tired, you're stressed out, but you still got to wake up, go to work, and do your best. So, what is that song that gets you up the hill?
Oh gosh, okay. I am a big appreciator of music. Oh man, I feel like that's a hard one. A song that gets me over like the hill, you say, that like gets me to the finish line.
To the finish line, or just gives you motivation to like
get
push
to work.
you.
Yeah.
Just to get to work and just motivate you.
Oh man, I don't know. There's so many songs. It depends on the mood I'm in. Sometimes I need something like really upbeat, or or sometimes I need something like super calm to like mellow me out because there's just too much on my mind. I music I always go back to often. Cambodian rock music. Have you guys listened to much of that at all? Are you guys
No.
familiar with like Rossari Satia or Cincy Simone? If
No.
not, there's this amazing documentary. It's called Don't Think I've Forgotten, and it goes through the history of this Cambodian rock music phenomenon that originated in Cambodia, I think during the late 60s and went on to the early 70s, and then it eventually met like a tragic end after the Khmer Rouge had taken over. But before that happened, there's these artists in Cambodia that had produced such amazing music that just transcends like all this time and all this history. I still listen to it today. I have fond memories of going to my mom and dad and saying like, hey, what song is this? Can you translate this? And they would talk about their memory of the certain types of musics and songs. And I have a very recent memory where I was on a boat with Sarah's family in Wisconsin, and they normally put on country or something, or rather something country-ish. And I think they had asked for me to put on some music, and I was like, do you want to listen to some Cambodian rock music? And so I put that on for them, and here we are in the middle of like Wisconsin on a lake, just listening to just was it Cincy Simone from like the 60s and 70s, and I think they liked it. And so there's a song, I think Sarah, it was on her Spotify year-end wrap-up. It's called Console Me. And it's from the soundtrack to that documentary I had mentioned earlier. So yeah, check that out.
I will, yeah.
I always feel like at my core when I'm listening to some of these amazing oldies. So you know,
Oh, awesome. Well, this has just been a great episode. Thank you so much for sharing all that you've, been through, but also what you're doing at the district and kind of giving us a new look at data in the sense of like how we can use it and getting us to a point where we start analyzing more, especially when we have it at our fingertips, or really advocate for getting that data that we need. So thank you so much for joining us. We
yeah,
appreciate your
thanks
time.
for having this
Thank you
platform.
so much.
Thank you.
Oh wait, so do we like sign